Hello, everyone. I hope you're well. I want to talk about an uncomfortable subject related to the current COVID 19 pandemic because I believe that COVID 19 has engendered an excessive reaction of fear and anxiety among so many of the British populace, particularly those alone in lockdown. We in the Muswell Hill community have tried to combat that by keeping in touch with members alone or who need help, but not everyone in the wider community has had that sort of support. So, the subject of my talk is death, a subject all too many find it difficult to talk about or think sensibly about. I don't mean to minimise the trauma of death, but we have to recognise that I am going to die and you are going to die, however young or old you are, one day. You must have heard, like I have, of members of the public being interviewed on the radio, TV or in the press, saying something like, "I'm frightened to death about this virus." It is understandable to be anxious about the unknown. And in the early days, so much about the effects of the virus was unknown. On the basis of what was known, we were urged or instructed to stay at home if we could. For those alone, often without close family or friends to talk to, or those afraid to open up and talk about the problem, they had all too much time to dwell upon their fears, thus magnifying them. I know of couples in lockdown together, both of whom are in the vulnerable category, whose anxieties fed upon one another, building into a paranoia. But why did this happen? I believe that most of us have been so distanced from unexpected death that we have developed an unhealthy approach to it. The tragedy of the death of a young person has become a rare occurrence. For most of us, the fact of untimely death is no longer a part of our lives. Think back to our grandparents' and great-grandparents' generations before the Second World War. What relatively short lives most of them had. Think about infant mortality rates then, and mothers dying in childbirth. Think about the years 1939 to 1945, when young men particularly were sent out to fight and those at home were left to worry whether they would return. Think about the civilians left at home, not knowing when they would lose their lives or their loved ones to bombing or the V-1 and V-2 rockets, or the fear of being invaded. For them, death was a part of everyday life. And now contrast that with the lives that we have led. Thanks to the positive attitudes of those who survived the war, our countries have been rebuilt, and there have been 75 years without a major war in Europe. There's been enormous progress in so many fields, particularly in the field of medicine. That is not to say we've been living in a utopia, a perfect world, but we are living longer, thanks to better diets, better health, and medical advances. 75 years of peace in Europe have also distanced us from death by war. And those born during World War II or since have only known that sort of state of affairs. So, when COVID-19 arrived and upset that normality, some sort of panic ensued. Yet within the normality of those 75 years, we all took risks in our everyday lives. Life and death decisions, if you like. For example, when crossing the road, cycling or driving, each was a personal decision arrived at after considering the possibilities. And that is what will happen as the lockdown is eased. We will have spent some 10 weeks being educated about the dangers of the virus. And we will have to weigh up the probabilities of future danger, both to ourselves and to others, in deciding what we should and should not do. If we approach the next few months with a thoughtful and, above all, positive attitude, considering continuing to be considerate of others, the Jewish imperative of chesed, which is the important lesson of Shavuos, then let us hope that the next 75 years will see a continuation and extension of peace, and that we will be part of building a return to some degree of prosperity and a better world in many ways.